Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have first a question. If I remember that right, you went to Gaza. So could you walk us through things you saw, your impressions, the challenges you're facing? And I have also a general question regarding financing. Do you believe that countries who are involved in these different conflicts and who deliberately destroy humanitarian infrastructure, they should be legally held accountable to pay for these humanitarian aid operations? Thank you.
Thanks, Ibsam. So yes, I was in Gaza in January. I'd hoped to get there much earlier. I went to Darfur in the first week in the job. I'd hoped to get to Gaza as early as that, but there were plenty of obstacles in the way of that visit. Absolutely vital to get in and see the operation on the ground. I think when the ceasefire was declared, a lot of people, and I think, to be honest, me included, wondered whether we would deliver the 600, 700 trucks a day that we'd been signed up to deliver. Massive amount of vital life-saving aid. But we did that. We delivered over 20,000 trucks. We delivered those 600, 700 trucks a day, fed 2 million people. And at every moment when partners or those on the ground sought to find a humanitarian alibi for breaking the ceasefire, ending the ceasefire, we were able to deal with those challenges and keep that aid flowing in. So that made a massive difference. And that's obviously a difference that we're not making and haven't been making for the last 2 weeks since the borders closed. Now, Gaza, I mean, some of you may have been in, probably not, because of the restrictions placed on the international media. It was much worse than I'd anticipated, and I'd really prepared myself for the worst. And bear in mind that by this stage, I'd been in Darfur, I'd been in Kupiansk on the front lines there, and I'd driven from the Lebanese border to the Turkish border all the way through Syria in the weeks after the change of government there, the caretaker authorities' arrival in Damascus. Gaza was on a completely different level. And I drove I'd been in Niros, one of the kibbutz that was hit on October the 7th, where 1 in 4 people were killed or taken hostage. So I'd heard those stories, met the survivors there, but then drove in through the Erez crossing into the north of Gaza. And in a way, the shock is even greater then, because the devastation and the desolation in northern Gaza is even greater than it is in the south. And for miles and miles, it's just rubble. You know, my staff trying to find their way back to their homes using GPS because there were no landmarks to navigate by. You couldn't see what was a school or what was a hospital, what was a home. And I've said this before, one of the first shocking things I saw driving in is the dogs going through the rubble. And I said to my colleague who was with me, why are the dogs so fat? And he said, well, because the dogs are looking for corpses. And you notice that the people are thin. And then you see that for miles and miles and miles. And I don't think anything can prepare you for that. And every single person I spent time with is deeply traumatized by that, by having lived through that, having survived that experience. And that includes our extraordinary staff on the ground, many of whom have lost their own homes and lost families. Utterly devastating. And I hope that more cameras, more journalists will be able to get in and tell that story over time. But as Steph was saying earlier on, the key thing now is that we're able to maintain that flow of aid in, because it had made such a difference. By the way, I was there during the announcement. I don't think we've seen the detail of it yet, of President Trump's plan on, I think he's called it the Riviera in Gaza. And so I was able to talk to a lot of Palestinians because, of course, it's important that they're consulted on this plan. And everyone I talked to said they were planning to stay. And everyone I talked to said, give us the tents so that we can rebuild our lives and our communities.
Thank you. Your second question, yeah.
Accountability. Sorry, I'll be quicker on that. Of course, absolutely, there should be accountability for anyone who is blocking aid getting to civilians. It's extraordinary that you're even having to ask the question, and that I'm having to give an answer with any suggestion there might be any other answer. But this is an example of this age of impunity that we're living through. That the basic foundations of international humanitarian law within which we operate as humanitarians are being challenged on all sides. I mentioned that number of over 300 humanitarian workers killed last year doing the work that we as the UN and the international community have asked them to do. So yes, there must be accountability. Those are clearly questions for lawyers and others to take forward, but as humanitarians, we want to see that accountability, and we want to see that protection for civilians. And we want to be allowed to do our job.
Gabriel, and then showing then Emily, and then...
Thanks, Mr. Fletcher. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Welcome to your new job. Hope it goes well. As you well know, the last 11 days, Israel has blocked the entrances to Gaza. When you were in Israel, you spoke to many high-ranking Israeli officials. Have you, in the last couple of weeks, spoken to them about this, and what are they saying? How much longer can this go on with the borders being closed until it reaches an absolute crisis from a humanitarian standpoint?
Well, I'd say 11 days is already 11 days too long to prevent aid reaching civilians who so badly need it. Now, I talked about how in those 6 weeks we made massive progress in feeding many of those millions who needed the food, getting medicine in, starting to get those hospitals back up and running. We opened several new wells while I was there. So all of that was making a massive difference. Fuel, Steph touched on this earlier on. The fact that we're not getting fuel in means that incubators are being switched off. So this is real already, and will quickly become a humanitarian crisis again. The supplies are clearly running out very, very fast. And so, yes, this is, I've been in contact with authorities in Tel Aviv. We are making the case in public and in private for allowing us to get those supplies back through, demanding that we get those supplies back through. And you've heard, I know, from my fantastic colleague Sigrid and my fantastic colleague Mohamed Hadi as well, about the efforts that they're making to get those supplies through. And you'll have seen Mohamed's statement on that in the last couple of days.
Sherwin, and Emily.
Inspector Sherwin Briceby, South African Broadcasting. We're talking here about, responding to the gaps that have emerged in financing and finding new financing. But I wonder if we could take a step back and talk about how we prevent the crises from evolving in the first place, and whose responsibility is that? Is it the Security Council, member states, individual countries? Just talk about how we stop this perpetual need for more money to respond to humanitarian crises, which is never enough, when we should really be focusing on prevention, should we not?
Absolutely. But while we fail to prevent, it's our job to carry on responding. But I've observed that effectively the job we're asked to do is to drive the ambulance back towards these wars in order to help the survivors and civilians. But over time, we've been asked to also drive the fire engine and start to try and put those crises out. Now, of course, there's a lot we need to do, border point by border point, crossing by crossing, to do the negotiations to get the aid through. But increasingly, there's also an expectation that humanitarians are then also drawn in to trying to end those crises. But we're doing all that at a time when the fire engine we're being asked to drive doesn't have enough water in the tank and is literally under attack, is being fired at. Our convoys are being fired at, and so on. So this is a real challenge, and it's exactly the right question. Now, whose job is it to then end those conflicts? Well, I think there's a collective responsibility for the international community to get much better at switching off conflicts. A big part of the challenge for us is that these wars are lasting longer and they're more ferocious, they're more intense. So that combination of the duration and the intensity is what's driving our numbers in the wrong direction. That bottom line number of 307 million, which defines whether we're doing our job or not, is only going in the wrong direction. So yes, I would like to see the Security Council step up several gears in response. I'd like to see member states step up several gears in response. And, the international community as a whole finding ways to end this conflict. I think one interesting dynamic at the moment that we're seeing, though, is that with a Security Council that is evidently struggling to get through a lot of political paralysis in recent years, you're seeing more regional solutions emerge for many of those crises. I've just come off a call with our humanitarian coordinators in all of Syria's neighbours about how we're working as a collective to get aid in, but also to ensure there is a political stability there that allows us to reach the almost 3/4 of the population who need help right now up and down Syria. And so maybe that's a bright spot in the midst of this pretty gloomy picture, that those regional groupings will be doing more and more to respond to those crises. I hope so.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. My name is Abdel Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have two interrelated questions. On personal note, I appreciate your comments about your observation after visiting Gaza. My question first about the West Bank. Do you see what's happening in Gaza is copied now, carbon copy of what happened in Gaza, happening now to the West Bank? And the second, sir, weaponizing humanitarian aid is a war crime. Fourth Geneva Convention is very clear about it. The Security Council, the G8, the humanitarian officials of the UN, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, all speak in one voice that humanitarian aid should not be weaponized. However, there is a member state who shunned off all these calls and yet continue day in and day out weaponizing humanitarian aid in Gaza and the West Bank. What else could be done other than appealing to the killer to be a little bit merciful? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm really concerned about what's happening in the West Bank, and I spent a day driving around observing it myself and talking to people who had been displaced or were facing displacement forcibly. And clearly the facts on the ground are being changed very rapidly. And that is a tragedy at the human level, of course, for those involved. But it's also a tragedy, for the prospects for the two-state solution, which, call me old-fashioned in the fact that I still use the phrase. But I still think it's the best hope we have for providing security, justice, opportunity for Palestinians and Israelis. I've not heard in the midst of all these creative ideas from various quarters a better idea than the two-state solution. However dim and distant it feels as a prospect right now. I don't know if it's a carbon copy of what's going on in Gaza. I think the situations are very different, but they're both extremely troubling in their own right. And we're spending a lot more time now focused on supporting communities who've been displaced in the West Bank, alongside, of course, that work on Gaza. I think I refer you to Steph's answer earlier on, referring you to his answers in the past on war crimes. I mean, what I would say, and I think I said this earlier on, is that international humanitarian law is very clear that we must be allowed to deliver aid to civilians wherever they are, and clear that there must be accountability if anyone stops us doing that. And the rest, I think, I leave to lawyers and other parts of the system to comment on.